Wyoming Territory, 1872. The train whistle pierced the afternoon quiet of Junction Creek, a sound so foreign to these parts that several townsfolk stepped out onto the dusty main street just to witness the spectacle. Among them stood Sheriff Finnegan Zane, his badge catching the late September sun as he adjusted his hat against the glare. At 26, Finn was too young to be both sheriff and widower, but life in the West had its own harsh timeline. 2 years into wearing the badge his father had once pinned to his own chest, Finn still felt like an imposter most days. The townspeople had elected him on the strength of his name and his cool head during the Robertson gang shootout, but grief had hollowed him out, leaving duty and routine to fill the space where joy had once lived. The train slowed to a stop at the modest station, belching steam into the crisp air. Junction Creek rarely received visitors worth noting. Mostly drummers, mail, and the occasional relative coming to stake a claim on family land. Today should have been no different. But it was. She stepped off the third car, a vision in a deep blue traveling dress that had seen better days but still maintained an air of Eastern refinement. Her honey-brown hair was partially contained under a small hat, with errant strands framing a face that seemed to hold both wariness and hope in equal measure. She carried only one small valise, gripped so tightly her knuckles had gone white. Finn watched as Station Master Wilkins approached her, no doubt asking about her travel plans or expected company. The woman's face fell, her shoulders slumping slightly as she shook her head. Wilkins scratched his beard, glanced around, then pointed toward the sheriff's office. "Sheriff," Wilkins called, waving Finn over. "Got a situation here." Finn crossed the street, dust kicking up around his boots. As he approached, he caught the scent of lavender, out of place in this town of leather, horse, and pine. "This is Sheriff Zane," Wilkins said to the woman. "Sheriff, this lady's name is Tabitha Harlow," she supplied, extending a gloved hand that trembled slightly. "I was supposed to be met by a Mr. James Colton. He arranged for my passage from Chicago." Finn took her hand briefly, tipping his hat. "Miss Harlow, I'm afraid there's no James Colton in Junction Creek or the surrounding county." Her face drained of color. That cannot be correct. We corresponded for months. He owns a cattle ranch here, the Circle C. He sent me this ticket." She fumbled in her reticule and produced the ticket stub, as if it might validate her entire journey. Finn's stomach sank. He'd seen this before. Women lured west with promises of marriage or employment, only to find themselves abandoned. Some less scrupulous transport companies even sold lists of unmarried women's addresses to opportunists throughout the territories. "Ma'am, I know every rancher within 50 miles. There's no Circle C and no Colton." Tabitha Harlow swayed slightly, and Finn instinctively reached out to steady her arm. "Perhaps there's been a misunderstanding," she said, her voice smaller now. "Perhaps he's delayed, or when was he expecting you?" "Today, September 18th. We arranged it precisely." Wilkins and Finn exchanged glances. Whoever this Colton was, he wasn't coming. "Is there someone back east I can wire for you? Family who might help with your return passage?" Finn asked gently. Her laugh held no humor. "There is no one. My parents passed last winter. It was why I finally accepted Mr. Colton's proposal. I had nowhere else to go." Her chin lifted then, a flash of pride amid the devastation. "I sold everything to come here." The train whistle blew again, a 5-minute warning before departure. "You could return to Chicago," Wilkins suggested, not unkindly. "And do what? Live on the street?" She shook her head. "No. I'll find something here. There must be work for a woman who can read, write, and keep accounts." Finn knew better. Junction Creek had exactly 3 businesses that might employ a woman. The hotel needed no additional help. The saloon would employ her, but not in a way a lady would accept. And the general store was run by the owner's wife and daughters. "Miss Harlow, I have a spare room at my house. It was my late wife's sewing room. It's yours until we figure something out." The offer surprised even him as it left his mouth. He hadn't had a visitor in that house since Martha died. The thought of someone else moving through those rooms made his chest tighten. Her eyes widened. "Sheriff Zane, I couldn't possibly. It's proper enough. My housekeeper, Mrs. Landry, lives in the back cottage. She's there most days, and I'm rarely home except to sleep." He nodded toward the west end of town. "It's the white house with the blue shutters, just past the church." Tabitha studied him, clearly weighing her limited options against the propriety of accepting lodging from a stranger, even one with a badge. "Just until I find suitable employment," she said finally. "And I insist on earning my keep somehow." The train whistle blew again, longer this time, as the engine built up steam. "That's settled then," Finn said, lifting her valise. "I'll show you the way." As they walked down Junction Creek's main street, they drew curious stares from the townsfolk. Finn nodded at familiar faces, aware of how quickly gossip would spread. By sundown, everyone would know about the woman no one came to claim, and how the widowed sheriff had taken her in. What Finn couldn't know, was that someone was indeed coming to claim Tabitha Harlow, just not the man she expected. And when he arrived, the fragile piece of Junction Creek would shatter like glass against stone. The spare room was small but clean, with a narrow bed, a chest of drawers, and a window that looked out onto an untended garden. Martha's sewing things had been pushed against one wall, her presence lingering in the colorful spools of thread and pincushions shaped like strawberries. "Mrs. Landry hasn't had time to clear it properly," Finn apologized, setting down Tabitha's valise. "It's perfect," she said, though they both knew it wasn't. She ran a finger along the windowsill, leaving a clean line in the dust. "I can help with the house. I'm quite capable." An awkward silence fell between them. Finn realized he was standing in a bedroom with a woman he'd just met, and though his intentions were honorable, the situation demanded a hasty retreat. "I'll leave you to settle in. Mrs. Landry will be by with some supper around 6. I have rounds to make, but I'll check in later." Before he could leave, Tabitha caught his sleeve. "Sheriff Zane, thank you. I don't know what I would have done." Her gratitude made him uncomfortable. He wasn't accustomed to being anyone's savior, not since he'd failed to save the one person who mattered most. Anyone would have done the same. "No," she said with certainty. "They wouldn't have." He tipped his hat and left quickly, needing air that didn't smell of lavender and new beginnings. Outside, he leaned against the porch railing, exhaling slowly. What had he done? Bringing a strange woman into his home, even with Mrs. Landry's presence as chaperone, would set tongues wagging. And if this Colton character did exist, and showed up late, there would be questions about why the sheriff had been so quick to install a pretty young woman in his house. Pretty. The word had slipped into his thoughts unbidden. Yes, Tabitha Harlow was pretty, more than pretty if he was being honest, but that wasn't why he'd offered her shelter. Was it? He pushed off the railing and headed back to his office. He had a telegram to send to the Chicago authorities about a possible confidence scheme targeting unmarried women. And perhaps, while he was at it, he would inquire about a Mr. James Colton. Just to be thorough, he told himself. Just to be sure. Tabitha unpacked her few possessions, arranging them carefully in the chest of drawers. One dress for church, one for everyday wear, and the traveling dress she currently wore. Undergarments, a nightgown, a small sewing kit, and a worn copy of Little Women that had belonged to her mother. And at the bottom of her valise, wrapped in a handkerchief, the letters. 12 of them, each carefully penned by James Colton, each describing his ranch, his dreams for the future, and his desire for a wife to share them with. She hadn't shown them to the sheriff. Something in his kind but pitying eyes had stopped her. She wasn't ready to have James's words dissected and dismissed. Not when they were all she had. The last letter had contained her train ticket and detailed instructions. Arrive on September 18th. I will meet you at the station. Wear something blue so I will know you. I have arranged everything with the minister. We can be married that very day if you wish it. She'd wished it. She'd wished it with every fiber of her being as the Chicago skyline had disappeared behind her. A fresh start. A home of her own. Someone to care whether she lived or died. Now she was stranded in a town where she knew no one. Dependent on the charity of a handsome young sheriff who clearly still mourned his wife. Sheriff Zane was not what she'd expected of a frontier lawman. There was a gentleness about him that seemed at odds with the gun on his hip and the stern set of his jaw. His eyes were a startling blue, the color of deep water, and he had a habit of pushing his light brown hair back from his forehead when he was thinking. He couldn't be much older than her 22 years, yet he carried himself with the weariness of someone who had already seen too much hardship. A knock at the door interrupted her thoughts. "Miss? I'm Mrs. Landry. The sheriff asked me to check on you." Tabitha opened the door to find a plump, gray-haired woman with kind eyes and flour-dusted hands. "Come in, please. I was just getting settled." Mrs. Landry surveyed the room with a housekeeper's critical eye. This room's been shut up too long. Needs a good airing. She moved to the window and pushed it open. Sheriff said you've had a rough day? Man who was supposed to meet you never showed. Tabitha nodded, not trusting her voice. Well, men are fools more often than not, Mrs. Landry declared. But our sheriff's one of the good ones. Lost his Martha 2 years ago this November. Influenza took her and the baby she was carrying. The information hit Tabitha like a physical blow. The baby. He'd lost not only his wife, but their child as well. How terrible, she whispered. Terrible indeed. But life goes on, doesn't it? Even when we think it can't. Mrs. Landry patted Tabitha's arm. Now, I've got a stew on and some fresh bread. Do you think you could eat something? Food was the last thing on Tabitha's mind, but she nodded anyway. Yes, thank you. And perhaps you could tell me about Junction Creek? If I'm to stay, even temporarily, I should learn about the town. Mrs. Landry smiled. Oh, there's plenty to tell about this place. Some of it even fit for polite company. As they headed to the kitchen, Tabitha cast one last glance at the letters hidden in her drawer. Tomorrow, she would read them again, searching for clues. James Colton had to be real. The alternative, that she had gambled her entire future on a cruel deception, was too painful to contemplate. Little did she know that across town, in the telegraph office, a message was already being tapped out that would bring both answers and danger to her door. 2 days passed before Finn received a response to his inquiries. 2 days in which he'd maintained a careful distance from his house guest, leaving early and returning late, taking his meals at the hotel dining room rather than at home. It wasn't that he was avoiding Tabitha, he told himself. He was giving her space to adjust, to grieve the future she'd planned and lost. But in truth, he was unsettled by her presence. The house felt different with her in it, less like a shrine to what he'd lost, and more like a home again. Mrs. Landry had reported that Miss Harlow was a hard worker, helping with cooking and cleaning, and had even started to bring order to the neglected garden. That girl's got grit, the housekeeper had said approvingly. And she's been asking about work. Wants to pay her own way. Finn had nodded, distracted by the thought of Tabitha kneeling in Martha's garden, bringing life back to what he'd let wither. Now, as he read the telegram in his office, a chill settled in his bones despite the afternoon heat. James Colton, unknown in Chicago, stopped. Third report this month of women lured west by phantom suitors. Stop potential trafficking ring. Suspected. Stop advise caution and protection for woman. Stop trafficking. The word made his blood run cold. He'd heard stories of women promised marriages or jobs, only to be abducted and sold to mining camps or worse. Was that what awaited Tabitha if he hadn't intervened? A knock at his office door jolted him from these dark thoughts. He quickly folded the telegram and tucked it into his vest pocket. Come in, he called, expecting one of the townspeople with a complaint about stray cattle or noisy neighbors. Instead, it was Tabitha herself, wearing a simple gray dress that somehow made her honey-brown hair shine brighter in contrast. She'd pulled it back into a neat bun, but a few strands had escaped to frame her face. She looked both determined and nervous. Sheriff Zane, I hope I'm not interrupting anything important. Not at all, Miss Harlow. Please, sit down. He gestured to the chair across from his desk. She perched on the edge of the seat, her back straight, hands folded primly in her lap. I've come to ask about employment opportunities in Junction Creek. Mrs. Landry mentioned that the school needs a teacher. Finn frowned. That position was filled just last month. Marcus Davidson's niece from Denver took it. He saw her face fall and quickly added, but there might be other options. What skills do you have? I was a bookkeeper for my father's dry goods store in Chicago. I can manage accounts, inventory, correspondence. I also play the piano and can teach music. Her chin lifted slightly. And I refuse to work in a saloon, so please don't suggest it. The corner of his mouth twitched. I wouldn't dream of it, Miss Harlow. He considered the businesses in town. The bank might need a teller, but Old Man Peterson was particular about hiring only men. The newspaper was run by the editor and his son. The Mercantile. Now there was a possibility. Walter Green at the Mercantile has been complaining that he can't keep up with the books since his arthritis got worse. His daughter Rose helps in the store, but she has no head for figures. I could speak to him. Hope brightened her eyes. Would you? I promise I won't disappoint. I'm a quick learner and very thorough. I'll talk to him today, Finn promised, then hesitated. The telegram in his pocket seemed to burn against his chest. He should tell her what he'd learned, warn her of the potential danger. But how could he tell this proud, hopeful woman that she'd been the target of something so sinister? That the man she'd pinned her future on might have been part of a plot to sell her like cattle? Is something wrong, Sheriff? She asked, noticing his troubled expression. Finn made a quick decision. No, nothing wrong. But perhaps you should call me Finn. Since we're sharing a roof. Sheriff seems overly formal. She smiled, a genuine smile that reached her eyes for the first time since he'd met her. Only if you'll call me Tabitha. Tabitha, he repeated, liking the way it felt on his tongue. I'll walk you back to the house before I see green. As they stepped onto the boardwalk, the afternoon sun warmed the air. Junction Creek's main street was busy with the usual traffic, wagons delivering goods, ranchers in town for supplies, children running errands for their mothers. It's a nice town, Tabitha observed. Smaller than I expected, but there's a peacefulness to it. Most days, Finn agreed, though we have our share of excitement. Saturday nights can get rowdy when the ranch hands come to town. They walked in companionable silence for a moment before Tabitha spoke again. Mrs. Landry told me about your wife. I'm so very sorry for your loss. Finn stiffened. He wasn't accustomed to discussing Martha with anyone, let alone a woman he barely knew. But there was no pity in Tabitha's voice, only genuine compassion. Thank you, he said simply. I lost my parents 6 months apart, she offered. My father to heart failure, my mother to what the doctor called a decline, but I think it was really grief. They'd been married 30 years. That must have been difficult for you. It was. She corrected herself. Some days I still expect to see them when I turn a corner. He nodded, understanding exactly what she meant. The hardest part is when you realize you've gone a whole day without thinking of them, and then the guilt hits you like a physical blow. Yes, she said softly. Exactly like that. Their eyes met in shared understanding, and for a moment, Finn felt a connection he hadn't experienced in years. It unsettled him enough that he looked away first. They were approaching his house when a rider came galloping down the street, heading straight for them. Finn instinctively moved Tabitha behind him, his hand going to his gun. The rider reined in sharply, his horse throwing up dust. Sheriff, there's trouble at the Carson place. Strangers asking questions, making threats. Old man Carson sent me to fetch you. Finn cursed under his breath. The Carson ranch was a good hour's ride from town. I'll be right there. Tell Carson to stay inside until I arrive. The rider nodded and spurred his horse back the way he'd come. I'm sorry, Finn said to Tabitha. I have to go. Of course. Don't worry about me. I can speak to Mr. Green myself. No, Finn said too quickly. The telegram's warning echoed in his mind. Wait until I return. Please. Just stay at the house with Mrs. Landry. Confusion crossed her face. Is something wrong? You seem worried. Finn hesitated. He should tell her about the telegram. But there was no time to explain properly, and he didn't want to frighten her unnecessarily. Just a precaution, he said. I shouldn't be gone more than a few hours. He hurried toward the livery stable, glancing back once to see Tabitha standing on the boardwalk, watching him go. The sun caught in her hair, turning it to spun gold, and for a moment, she looked like a woman waiting for her man to return from danger, a tableau as old as the West itself. The thought followed him as he saddled his horse, along with a growing certainty that whatever was happening at the Carson place was somehow connected to the woman no one had come to claim. The Carsons' trouble turned out to be 3 rough-looking men asking questions about new arrivals in town, particularly women traveling alone. They'd left when the old rancher had threatened them with his shotgun, but not before suggesting they'd be back. Said they was looking for a runaway wife. Carson explained as Finn examined the tracks the strangers had left. Said she might be using a different name. When I told, and we don't get many newcomers except for the schoolteacher last month, they got nasty. Said I was lying. Finn's unease grew. Did they describe this woman? Give a name? Carson scratched his beard. Brown hair, they said. Pretty. Name of Tilly, I think. Or Tina. Something with A.T. Tabitha. It had to be. But who were these men? If James Colton was fictional, who was looking for her? I need to get back to town, Finn said, swinging onto his horse. Lock your doors tonight, Carson. If they come back, fire a shot in the air. Someone will hear it and come running. He rode hard, pushing his horse faster than was wise on the rocky trail. If these men were working their way from ranch to ranch, They'd eventually reach town, if they weren't there already. The sun was setting by the time Junction Creek came into view, the windows of the buildings glowing with lamplight. Everything looked normal, peaceful even. But Finn's instincts, honed by years of keeping watch over this community, told him something was wrong. He tied his horse outside the sheriff's office and stepped inside to retrieve his shotgun. Deputy Lewis was at the desk, feet up, reading a dime novel. "Any trouble while I was gone?" Finn asked, loading the shotgun with practiced efficiency. Lewis sat up straight. "No, sir. Quiet as a church mouse. Except what? There's 3 strangers at the saloon. Rode in about an hour ago. Been asking questions." "What kind of questions?" Lewis shrugged. "About newcomers to town. Specifically, women traveling alone." Finn checked his pistol, making sure it was fully loaded. "I want you to go to my house. Miss Harlow is there with Mrs. Landry. Don't tell her why, but don't let her out of your sight. If anyone approaches the house who isn't me, you shoot first and ask questions later. Understand?" The deputy's eyes widened. "Yes, sir. What are you going to do? Have a talk with our visitors?" Finn's boot heels echoed on the boardwalk as he made his way to the saloon. Inside, the usual evening crowd had gathered, ranch hands playing cards, the barkeep polishing glasses, Sadie and her girls entertaining customers at the far tables. And there, at a corner table, sat 3 men who didn't belong. Their clothes were trail-worn but of good quality. They carried expensive firearms and had the hard look of men who used them regularly. Not common bandits, then. These were professionals of some kind. Finn positioned himself at the bar, watching them in the mirror behind the bottles. They were talking in low voices, heads bent together, occasionally glancing around the room. "Who are they, Pete?" Finn asked the barkeep quietly. Pete wiped a glass dry. "Don't know. Said they're looking for someone. A woman. Offered money for information." "What woman?" "Didn't say a name. Just described her. Young, pretty, brown hair. Said she might be using a false name." Finn took a slow sip of the whiskey Pete had poured him. "They say why they're looking for her. Said she's the wife of a friend who ran off. Took some valuables with her." Pete's voice dropped even lower. "I don't believe them for a minute. Got a mean look about them." Finn nodded, set down his glass, and turned to face the stranger's table. It was time to find out what they wanted with Tabitha Harlow. As he approached, the men fell silent, watching him with careful expressions that didn't quite mask their wariness. The badge on his chest had that effect on men with secrets. "Evening, gentlemen. I'm Sheriff Zane. Understand you're looking for someone." The oldest of the 3, a weathered man with cold gray eyes, smiled thinly. "That's right, Sheriff. A young lady who's caused some trouble for an associate of ours back east. Nothing that concerns local law enforcement." "Everything in Junction Creek concerns me," Finn said mildly, "including strangers asking about our citizens. We were told she might have come this way," the second man said. He was younger, with a scar that pulled at one corner of his mouth. "Name of Tabitha Harlow." So they knew her real name. That was unexpected. "What's she done?" Finn asked, keeping his voice neutral. "Theft," said the third man, who had remained silent until now. He was the most dangerous-looking of the 3, lean and watchful, with eyes that never settled in one place for long. "She stole something valuable from a businessman in Chicago. We've been hired to retrieve it." "You're not lawmen," Finn observed. The older man shrugged. "Private agents. Our employer prefers discretion over a public scandal." It was plausible enough, but Finn didn't believe a word of it. The telegram's warning about trafficking rang in his ears. "If she shows up, I'll be sure to let you know," he lied smoothly. "Where are you staying?" "The hotel," the scarred man said. "Room 3. Finn nodded. "Enjoy your evening, gentlemen. But keep in mind that Junction Creek is a peaceful town. I intend to keep it that way." The threat was veiled but clear. The older man inclined his head in acknowledgement. "Understood, Sheriff. We're just here to do a job, not cause trouble." Finn left the saloon, his mind racing. He needed to get Tabitha out of town before these men discovered where she was. But first, he needed to hear her side of the story. Had she stolen something? Was she running from the law? Somehow, he couldn't reconcile the woman he'd come to know, hardworking, honest, proud, with a thief on the run. But then, he'd been wrong about people before. He rounded the corner to his street and stopped cold. The front door of his house stood open, spilling light onto the porch. And on that porch, Lewis lay motionless, blood pooling beneath his head. Tabitha's heart pounded as she huddled in the root cellar beneath Mrs. Landry's cottage, the older woman's arm wrapped protectively around her shoulders. "Stay quiet, child," Mrs. Landry whispered. "The sheriff will come. He always comes." The events of the past hour played through Tabitha's mind in terrifying flashes. The young deputy arriving, explaining that the sheriff wanted her to stay inside. The knock at the door 20 minutes later. The deputy answering. Then the sickening sound of a blow and a body falling. Mrs. Landry had reacted with surprising speed for a woman of her age, pulling Tabitha through the kitchen and out the back door, across the small yard to her cottage. "The root cellar," she'd hissed. "They won't look there." Now they waited in the musty darkness, listening for footsteps above. They had heard men searching the main house, calling her name in falsely friendly tones. "Tabitha, we just want to talk. Come out now, and no one else gets hurt." She knew those voices. Or at least, she knew one of them. The smooth, cultured tone that had introduced himself in her father's store 6 months ago as James Colton, cattle rancher from Wyoming Territory. The man whose letters had given her hope, whose promises had drawn her west. Except he wasn't James Colton. She didn't know who he really was. But his presence here, with men who had hurt the deputy, confirmed her worst fears. It had all been a lie. "I've been such a fool," she whispered, more to herself than to Mrs. Landry. "Hush now," the housekeeper said. "Whatever you did or didn't do, the sheriff will sort it out." But would he? Once he learned she'd brought this danger to his door, to his town, would he still want to help her? Or would he hand her over to these men to get rid of the problem? The thought had barely formed when they heard a commotion from the main house, shouting, then a single gunshot that made both women flinch. "Stay here," Mrs. Landry ordered, moving toward the cellar steps. "I'm going to see what's happening." "No," Tabitha clutched at her arm. "They'll hurt you. I'm just going to peek out the cottage window. They don't know we're here." Mrs. Landry patted her hand. "Be brave, girl. I'll be right back." Alone in the darkness, Tabitha wrapped her arms around herself and tried to make sense of what was happening. Why had these men followed her? What did they want? Her mind returned to her father's store in those final days after his death, when she was settling his affairs. The well-dressed stranger who'd expressed interest in buying the business, who had returned several times to discuss terms. How he had mentioned, almost casually, that he was looking for a wife to take back to his ranch in Wyoming. She had been vulnerable, grieving, facing an uncertain future. His letters had painted a picture of a life she desperately wanted, security, purpose, perhaps even love eventually. She had believed every word. What a perfect target she must have seemed. The cellar door creaked open, and Tabitha pressed herself against the wall, holding her breath. "It's me," Mrs. Landry whispered. "Come quickly. The sheriff's here, but he's outnumbered." Tabitha scrambled up the steps. "What's happening?" "3 men have the sheriff pinned down in the house. There's been shooting." Mrs. Landry led her to the cottage window, where they could see the main house. "He needs help, but I'm too old to handle a gun." "I can't either," Tabitha said helplessly. Mrs. Landry's face hardened with determination. "Then we need to get word to town. The saloon's full of men who'd help the sheriff if they knew. They'd see us leaving. Not if we use the back way, through the gardens. Most of these houses connect at the back. We can reach the alley behind the mercantile without being seen." It was their only chance. Tabitha nodded. "Let's go." They slipped out the back door into the gathering darkness. The night air was cool against Tabitha's flushed face as they crept through the vegetable gardens that stretched behind the row of houses. She could hear shouting from the street, but the sound seemed distant, muffled by the beating of her own heart. "Almost there," Mrs. Landry whispered as they reached the edge of the mercantile's storage yard. The saloon's just beyond. A figure stepped out from behind a stack of crates, blocking their path. In the dim light from a nearby window, Tabitha recognized the scarred mouth of one of the men who had been searching for her. Well, he said, his voice almost pleasant. "Miss Harlow, we've been looking everywhere for you." Mrs. Landry stepped in front of Tabitha. "You leave her be. The sheriff will." The man backhanded Mrs. Landry with casual cruelty, sending the older woman sprawling to the ground. "The sheriff is a bit occupied at the moment." Tabitha dropped to her knees beside Mrs. Landry, who was dazed but conscious. "Run, child," the housekeeper murmured. But it was too late for running. The scarred man seized Tabitha's arm, yanking her to her feet. "Don't make this harder than it needs to be," he growled. The boss wants what you took, then maybe we'll let you go. I don't know what you're talking about, Tabitha said, struggling against his grip. I didn't take anything. The ledger, he hissed. Your father's store ledger with the names. Don't play dumb. Names. What names? Her father's customer ledger had been nothing special, just accounts and purchases for a small dry goods store. Unless it had been something more. The realization hit her like ice water. Her father's store had been a front for something else. Something these men wanted badly enough to lure her across the country, to hurt people, to risk confronting a sheriff. I don't have it, she said truthfully. I left all the store records with the lawyer who handled the sale. The scarred man's face twisted. You're lying. Our man watched you pack it. Their man, James Colton, or whatever his real name was. Had he been watching her that closely? The thought made her skin crawl. I packed my father's Bible, not a ledger, she said. Check my things if you don't believe me. Oh, we will. He started dragging her toward the street. After we deal with your sheriff friend. A gunshot echoed from the direction of the house, followed by the sound of breaking glass. Tabitha's heart seized. Was Finn hurt? Dead? Her fear must have shown on her face, because the scarred man laughed. Worried about him, are you? Got sweet on the local lawman already? He should have minded his own business. Something snapped inside Tabitha at his words. Finn had shown her nothing but kindness, had offered shelter when she had nowhere to go. And now he might be dying because of her. No, she wouldn't let that happen. With a strength born of desperation, she brought her heel down hard on the man's instep, simultaneously driving her elbow back into his ribs as she'd once seen a stagecoach guard demonstrate to her father. The scarred man cursed and loosened his grip just enough for Tabitha to wrench free. She stumbled backward, nearly falling over Mrs. Landry, who was struggling to sit up. Run! Tabitha shouted at her. Get help! Mrs. Landry crawled behind a stack of crates as the scarred man lunged for Tabitha again. This time she was ready, grabbing a loose board from a broken crate and swinging it with all her might. The board connected with the side of his head with a sickening crack. He staggered, momentarily stunned, and Tabitha didn't wait to see if he recovered. She ran, not toward the saloon, but back toward the house where Finn was fighting for his life. Because of her. Because she had unwittingly brought danger to his door. And she could not, leave him to face it alone. Finn crouched behind the overturned dining table, blood trickling from a graze on his temple where a bullet had come too close. Lewis was still alive, thank God, though badly concussed from the blow to his head. Mrs. Landry and Tabitha were missing, hopefully hidden somewhere safe. Two of the men from the saloon had him pinned down in the front parlor, the older man and the dangerous one with the watchful eyes. The third, the one with the scar, had gone to search the back of the property. This doesn't have to end badly, Sheriff. The older man called from his position by the front door. Just tell us where the girl is, and we'll be on our way. Already told you. She's not here. Finn replied, checking his ammunition. 3 bullets left in his revolver, plus the shotgun with 2 shells. Not great odds against men who clearly knew how to handle themselves in a firefight. We know she was here. Her things are in the bedroom. Finn remained silent, listening for any movement that might give away their positions. The house was dark except for a single lamp that had been knocked to the floor during the initial confrontation, its chimney shattered, the flame guttering but still providing enough light to cast long shadows across the room. What's so important about this woman anyway? Finn asked, trying to buy time. Someone in town must have heard the shots. Help would come eventually. The older man chuckled. That's not your concern, Sheriff. But since you've taken such an interest in her welfare, I should warn you. She's not what she seems. She's a thief. Stole something very valuable from my employer. And who might that be? A businessman with interests throughout the territories. The kind of man who doesn't take kindly to being robbed. Finn didn't believe a word of it. But he needed to keep them talking. If she's stolen something, there are legal channels. Courts, trials. That's how we do things in civilized society. Some matters require discretion. A floorboard creaked to Finn's left. The watchful man was trying to flank him. Finn shifted position, keeping the table between them. I can't help wondering, Finn said loudly, why a simple theft would require 3 armed men to track down one woman. Must be something mighty important. Important enough that we won't leave without it, the older man replied. Or without her. Another creak, closer this time. Finn readied the shotgun. They were getting impatient. which made them dangerous but also more likely to make mistakes. A sudden commotion from the kitchen made all three men freeze. The sound of something heavy falling, then running footsteps. "Got her, Pratt," called a voice, the scarred man, returning from his search. "She was trying to sneak in the back." Finn's heart sank as Tabitha was shoved into the parlor, her face bruised, her dress torn at the shoulder. Behind her, the scarred man looked worse, blood streaming from a cut on his temple, his expression murderous. "Bitch hit me with a board," he snarled, giving her another push that sent her stumbling to her knees in the center of the room. The older man, Pratt, apparently, stepped into the light. "Miss Harlow, so good to see you again." Tabitha's eyes widened in recognition. "Mr. Ellis, or is that even your real name?" "It's real enough," Pratt Ellis said with a cold smile. "More real than James Colton, at any rate." Finn watched this exchange with growing understanding. Ellis had been the one who lured her west, using the fictional Colton as bait. "Where is it, Miss Harlow?" Ellis asked. "The ledger. Give it to us, and this unpleasantness can end." Tabitha shook her head. "I don't have it. I never did." The scarred man grabbed her hair, wrenching her head back. "Stop lying." "Hey," Finn shouted, rising slightly from his position. "Take your hands off her." Ellis glanced at him with mild interest. "Still playing the hero, Sheriff? You don't even know what she's done." "I know she doesn't deserve to be treated like this," Finn said, his voice hard. "And I know you're not leaving this town with her." Ellis sighed, as if disappointed by Finn's stubbornness. "Jones," he said to the watchful man, "search her room again. Tear it apart if you have to. Brock, keep an eye on our friends here." The scarred man, Brock, grinned unpleasantly, keeping his gun trained on Tabitha while Jones disappeared up the stairs. Ellis turned back to Finn. "I do admire your dedication, Sheriff. Taking in a strange woman, protecting her without question. One might almost think there's more than charity motivating your actions." Finn said nothing, his eyes on Tabitha. She was watching him, her expression a mixture of fear and something else, something that looked almost like resolve. "I'm sorry," she said softly. "I never meant to bring this to your door." "Not your fault," Finn replied. "These men would have caused trouble no matter what." Ellis chuckled. "Such touching concern for each other. Perhaps there is something between you after all." "There's nothing here, Pratt." Jones called from upstairs. "Checked everything twice." Ellis's smile faded. "Check again. It has to be here." "I told you," Tabitha said. "I don't have whatever you're looking for." Ellis studied her for a moment, then nodded to Brock. "Perhaps some persuasion is needed." Brock grinned and raised his hand to strike Tabitha. Without thinking, Finn fired from behind the table, the bullet catching Brock in the shoulder and spinning him around. The room exploded into chaos. Ellis fired at Finn's position, splintering wood as Finn rolled away from the table. Tabitha scrambled for cover behind a chair. Brock, despite his wound, recovered enough to aim his gun at Finn. 2 guns against 1, and Finn was exposed. He had a split second to decide which threat to address first. The decision was made for him when Tabitha suddenly lunged at Brock, grabbing his wounded arm and forcing it upward. His shot went wild, burying itself in the ceiling. Finn took the opportunity to level his shotgun at Ellis. "Drop it," he commanded. "It's over." Ellis hesitated, calculating his odds. "You can still walk out of here," Finn said. "But not with her. Never with her." For a moment, the outcome hung in the balance. Then Ellis slowly lowered his gun. "This isn't over, Sheriff," he said quietly. "The people I work for don't give up easily." "Neither do I," Finn replied. The front door burst open, and several townsmen rushed in, drawn by the gunfire. Among them was Wilkins from the station and Pete from the saloon, both armed. "Sheriff, you all right?" Wilkins asked, taking in the scene with wide eyes. "I am now," Finn said, not lowering his shotgun. "These men are under arrest for assault, attempted kidnapping, and shooting at an officer of the law." As the townsmen moved to secure Ellis and Brock, Finn crossed to where Tabitha stood trembling by the overturned chair. He wanted to pull her into his arms, to assure himself she was really safe, but instead, he gently touched her bruised cheek. "Are you hurt?" She shook her head, her eyes never leaving his face. "You're bleeding." He touched his temple, had forgotten the graze in the heat of the moment. "It's nothing, Mrs. Landry," Tabitha said suddenly. "She's hurt too. In the yard behind the mercantile." Finn nodded to Pete. "Check on her." and send someone for the doctor. As the townsmen led Ellis and Brock away, Finn finally lowered his shotgun. The immediate danger was past, but Ellis's parting words echoed in his mind. This isn't over. Jones was still upstairs, and Finn sent Wilkins to apprehend him. Then he turned back to Tabitha, who had sunk onto the sofa, the adrenaline of the fight clearly leaving her drained. They were looking for something, Finn said, sitting beside her. A ledger, they said. Tabitha nodded wearily. My father's store ledger. But I don't understand why it's so important. It was just a record of accounts and inventory. Unless it wasn't, Finn suggested. Could your father have been involved in something illegal? Her head came up sharply. No, he was the most honest man I've ever known. He would never. She trailed off, her brow furrowing as she considered the possibility. But then, how well do we ever really know anyone? She continued softly. Even those closest to us can have secrets. Finn thought of his own father, the former sheriff, whose reputation for integrity had been unmatched in the county. Yet after his death, Finn had discovered that the old man had sometimes bent the law to serve a higher justice, protecting women from abusive husbands, helping escaped slaves years before the war, turning a blind eye to petty thefts by starving children. Good men could do questionable things for the right reasons. Whatever your father was involved in, Finn said, these men believe you have evidence that could harm them. That makes you a target. Tabitha's shoulders slumped. Then I should leave. I've brought nothing but trouble to you in this town. No, Finn said firmly. Running won't solve this. These men found you once. They could find you again. What choice do I have? Stay, he said, the word escaping before he could consider its implications. Stay here, where I can protect you. We'll figure this out together. She looked up at him, surprise and something warmer flickering in her eyes. Why would you do that? You barely know me. Finn couldn't answer immediately. Why indeed? Because she needed help? Because he'd sworn an oath to protect the innocent? Or because in the few days she'd been in his home, she'd somehow awakened something he'd thought died with Martha, a desire for connection, for companionship, for a future that held more than just duty and memories? Because it's the right thing to do, he said finally, the safest of his many reasons. Tabitha studied his face, seeming to search for something beyond his words. Whatever she saw must have reassured her, because she nodded slowly. All right, I'll stay. The doctor arrived then, breaking the moment between them. As he tended to Lewis and examined Finn's head wound, Tabitha moved about the room, righting furniture and picking up broken glass with a quiet efficiency that spoke of a woman accustomed to bringing order from chaos. Watching her, Finn realized that the telegram had been both right and wrong. There was a danger to Tabitha, but not from the kind of trafficking ring they'd suspected. Something else was at work here, something connected to her father's business in Chicago, something valuable enough that powerful men would go to great lengths to recover it. And now, for better or worse, her problems had become his. Not just because of his badge, but because somewhere between the train platform and this blood-spattered parlor, Tabitha Harlow had become important to him in ways he wasn't yet ready to examine too closely. But as he watched her move through his home, Martha's home, with quiet dignity despite her torn dress and bruised face, Finn knew one thing with absolute certainty: no one would harm her again. Not while he drew breath. The widowed sheriff had given her a room and, unintentionally, a reason to stay. Now he would give her something else, a promise of safety, for as long as she needed it. 3 days after the attack, Junction Creek had settled back into its normal rhythms, though with a newfound wariness. The 3 men who had come for Tabitha were locked in the town jail, awaiting transport to the territorial prison. They had refused to name their employer, maintaining that they were merely hired to retrieve stolen property. Tabitha sat at Walter Green's desk in the back room of the Mercantile, reviewing the store's ledgers. True to his word, Finn had spoken to Green about hiring her, and the old merchant had been delighted to turn his chaotic books over to someone who understood figures. The work was straightforward enough, allowing her mind to wander back to the mystery that had followed her from Chicago. What could her father possibly have recorded that was worth sending armed men across the country? And why did they think she had it? She'd gone through her belongings a dozen times, finding nothing that resembled a business ledger. The only item she'd brought from her father's store was his Bible, a worn leather volume that had sat on his desk for as long as she could remember. The Bible. Tabitha's hands stilled over the columns of numbers. Could it be that simple? Miss Harlow. Rose Green poked her head into the office. Sheriff Zane is here to see you. Finn stood in the doorway, hat in hand, looking more rested than he had in the days immediately following the attack. The cut on his temple was healing. The bruising around it faded to a yellowish green. Am I interrupting? He asked. Not at all. I was just finishing up. Tabitha closed the ledger and rose from the desk. Mr. Green will be pleased. His accounts weren't nearly as tangled as he thought. Finn smiled. Good news for him, though if the work's too easy, you might get bored. After recent events, I find I rather appreciate boredom, she said, returning his smile. They walked outside into the crisp October afternoon. The trees along Main Street had begun to turn, splashing gold and red against the backdrop of blue mountains. It was beautiful in a way Chicago had never been, wild and vast, and somehow more real. I've had a telegraph from the U.S. Marshal's office in Denver, Finn said as they strolled toward the boardwalk. They're sending someone to question Ellis and his men. Seems they're suspected of other crimes across the territory. Did they say anything more about who might have sent them? Finn shook his head. Not specifically, but they mentioned rumors of a syndicate operating throughout the Midwest and Western territories. Gambling, protection rackets, smuggling. The kind of organization that keeps ledgers of their operations. Tabitha's step faltered. You think my father was involved with such people? Not necessarily willingly, Finn said gently. His store might have been used without his knowledge. Or perhaps he discovered something he wasn't supposed to and recorded it. They reached the sheriff's house, their house, as Tabitha had begun to think of it, though she knew her stay was temporary. Mrs. Landry was in the garden, her head bandaged, but her spirit undimmed as she directed a young boy in the harvesting of late vegetables. I had a thought, Tabitha said as they climbed the porch steps, about where the ledger might be. Finn held the door for her. Where? My father's Bible. I brought it with me from Chicago. She headed for her room, Finn following. He was always writing in it, notes in the margins, slipping papers between pages. I thought he was just studying scripture, but what if? She trailed off as she opened the drawer where she kept the Bible. It was a substantial volume, bound in brown leather worn soft with age and handling. She carried it to the small table by the window and opened it carefully. The pages were filled with her father's neat handwriting, notes on verses, cross-references, dates of family births and deaths. But there was something else too. Certain passages were underlined in different colored inks, with numbers and initials in the margins that had no obvious connection to the text. It's a code, Finn said, looking over her shoulder. The Bible is just the key to understanding it. Tabitha turned pages slowly, seeing her father's annotations with new eyes. He must have been recording transactions or meetings, dates, amounts, perhaps names or locations. But why? Finn mused. Was he part of this syndicate, or was he gathering evidence against them? Tabitha's fingers traced a passage her father had marked heavily, Proverbs 28, verse 13. Whoever conceals their sins does not prosper, but the one who confesses and renounces them finds mercy. He was gathering evidence, she said with sudden certainty. My father was a God-fearing man, but he was also practical. Our store was struggling after the war. He might have made compromises, done business with people he shouldn't have. But this. She tapped the underlined verse. This was his confession, his attempt to make things right. Finn nodded slowly. And if he was preparing to turn evidence against a criminal organization, it would explain why they came after me, Tabitha finished. They must have thought he told me everything, or at least entrusted me with the evidence. Which, unknowingly, he did. Finn carefully took the Bible from her hands. This could be very dangerous, Tabitha. These people clearly have resources and reach. I know. She met his gaze steadily. But if my father was trying to expose them, to make amends for whatever role he played in their operations, then I want to finish what he started. Finn studied her face, his expression a mixture of admiration and concern. It won't be easy, and it won't be safe. Few worthwhile things are, she replied softly. A moment stretched between them, charged with unspoken thoughts and feelings that had been building since the night of the attack, perhaps even since that first meeting at the train station. Finn broke the silence first. I'll contact the marshal. This evidence could be crucial in building a case against this syndicate. Tabitha nodded, feeling both relieved and oddly disappointed that he had returned to practical matters. Of course. He turned to leave, then stopped at the door. "Tabitha." "Yes. I'm glad you decided to stay." His voice was quiet, almost hesitant. She smiled, warmth spreading through her chest. "So am I." After he left, Tabitha sat by the window, watching the sun cast long shadows across the garden where Mrs. Landry still worked. So much had changed in such a short time. She had come to Junction Creek expecting to become a wife, to find security in marriage to a man she barely knew. Instead, she had found danger, mystery, and perhaps something else, something that frightened and exhilarated her in equal measure. The widowed sheriff had indeed given her a room and a reason to stay. But now she was beginning to hope for more, not just safety or purpose, but a chance at happiness she had thought forever beyond her reach. Winter came early to Junction Creek that year, the first snow falling before Thanksgiving. By Christmas, the mountains were blanketed in white, the town transformed into a scene from a picture postcard, lamplight glowing through frosted windows, smoke curling from chimneys, pine boughs and red ribbons adorning doorways. For Tabitha, it was a season of unexpected joy. The danger that had followed her from Chicago had not disappeared. Ellis and his men had been transported to Denver for trial, but their employer remained at large. Yet she felt safer than she had in years. The Bible code had been deciphered by U.S. Marshal Donovan, revealing a network of corruption that stretched from Chicago to San Francisco, implicating politicians, businessmen, and lawmen alike. "Your father was a brave man," Donovan had told her. He kept records of every illegal transaction that passed through his store, names, dates, amounts. It's enough to bring down half the criminal enterprises in the Midwest. Tabitha had felt a mixture of pride and sorrow at his words. Pride that her father had sought redemption, sorrow that he hadn't lived to see justice done. But she had continued his work, testifying before a grand jury in Denver about the men who had pursued her and the circumstances that had brought her to Junction Creek. Through it all, Finn had been by her side, steady, supportive, increasingly essential to her happiness. Their shared household had raised eyebrows at first, but Mrs. Landry's presence and Tabitha's position as the mercantile's bookkeeper had eventually silenced the gossips. Or perhaps it was simply that anyone with eyes could see that the relationship between the sheriff and the Chicago woman was one of mutual respect and careful propriety. If there were deeper feelings growing between them, and there were, on Tabitha's part at least, they remained unspoken, held in check by Finn's lingering grief for Martha and Tabitha's uncertainty about her place in his life. Now, as Christmas Eve settled over Junction Creek, Tabitha put the finishing touches on the small tree they had set up in the parlor. The room had been repaired after the attack, the bullet holes plastered over, the damaged furniture replaced. But like the people who lived there, it carried invisible scars beneath its renewed surface. "It looks beautiful," Mrs. Landry said, bringing in a tray of hot cider. "First Christmas tree this house has seen in 3 years." Tabitha adjusted a hand-carved ornament, a gift from one of the townspeople who had taken her under their collective wing. "Do you think Finn will mind? I know the holidays are difficult for him." "Difficult, yes, but necessary." Mrs. Landry set the tray on the side table. "Life's for the living, my girl." Martha would be the first to say so. The front door opened, bringing a swirl of snowflakes and cold air. Finn stomped his boots on the mat, his cheeks reddened from the cold, his arms full of parcels. "It's really coming down out there," he said, closing the door behind him. Then he caught sight of the tree, and his steps faltered. "You've been busy." Tabitha suddenly felt uncertain. "I hope you don't mind. I thought it might be nice to have a proper Christmas." He stared at the tree for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then, slowly, a smile warmed his face. "It's perfect, just like the ones my mother used to decorate when I was a boy." Relief flooded through her. Mrs. Landry's made cider, and there's stew keeping warm for supper. "First, presents," Finn said, nodding to the packages in his arms. "It's a tradition in my family to open one gift on Christmas Eve." Mrs. Landry clapped her hands. "Well now, that sounds like a fine idea. I'll just fetch mine from my cottage." After she had bustled out, a companionable silence fell between Tabitha and Finn. He arranged his parcels under the tree, then straightened to look at her. "You've brought Christmas back to this house," he said softly. "I didn't realize how much I'd missed it until I saw that tree." Tabitha's heart quickened at the warmth in his voice. "It's been good for me too. After my parents died, I thought holidays would always be something to endure rather than enjoy. But here, she gestured around the cozy room. It feels like home. Home. The word hung between them, weighted with meaning. Finn took a step toward her, then hesitated. Tabitha, The door flew open again, and Mrs. Landry returned, her arms full of gaily wrapped packages. Found them. Now who's going first? The moment broken, Finn stepped back, his expression shifting to one of easy affability. Ladies first, I think. They gathered around the tree, the warm glow of lamplight and the scent of pine creating a scene of domestic contentment that would have been unimaginable to Tabitha just months ago. Mrs. Landry unwrapped a new shawl from Finn and a set of hair combs from Tabitha, exclaiming over both with genuine delight. Tabitha's gift from Mrs. Landry was a beautifully embroidered handkerchief. Every lady needs a fine handkerchief, the older woman explained, for happy tears as well as sad ones. Then Finn handed Tabitha a small, carefully wrapped package. This is from me. She unwrapped it slowly, conscious of his eyes on her face. Inside was a slim volume of poetry by Emily Dickinson, its cover tooled in gold leaf. I noticed you reading the newspaper articles about her work, Finn said. The bookseller in Denver ordered this specially. Tabitha ran her fingers over the embossed cover, touched beyond words that he had noticed such a small detail about her. It's perfect. Thank you. Mrs. Landry handed Finn his gift from Tabitha next, a new leather holster she had commissioned from the saddle maker, tooled with his initials and lined with soft buckskin. This is far too fine for everyday wear, Finn said, admiring the craftsmanship. I disagree, Tabitha replied. The man who keeps us all safe deserves the best. Their eyes met over the gift, and something shifted in the air between them, a recognition, perhaps, that they had moved beyond the caution of recent months into something new and fragile and full of possibility. Mrs. Landry cleared her throat. Well, I think that's enough excitement for an old woman. I'll just take these lovely gifts back to my cottage and leave you young people to enjoy the evening. Despite their protests, she insisted on departing, leaving Tabitha and Finn alone with the glowing tree and the crackling fire. More cider, Tabitha offered, moving toward the tray. Tabitha. Finn's voice stopped her. There's something I've been wanting to say to you. Something I should have said weeks ago. She turned back to him, her heart suddenly racing. Yes. He stepped closer, close enough that she could see the flecks of darker blue in his eyes, the slight unevenness of his stubble where the scar on his jaw interrupted its growth. When you came to Junction Creek, I was existing, not living. Going through the motions of a life I no longer felt connected to. His voice was low, intent. Then you arrived, and everything changed. You brought color back to a world that had been gray for so long. Tabitha barely dared breathe. Finn, I know it hasn't been very long, he continued. And I know that your life has been unsettled, that you came here expecting something very different. But I can't let another day go by without telling you how I feel. He took her hands in his touch warm and steady. I love you, Tabitha Harlow. I love your courage and your kindness, your intelligence and your grace. I love the way you've made a place for yourself in this town, in this home. His voice caught slightly. In my heart, tears welled in Tabitha's eyes, happy tears that would indeed require Mrs. Landry's gift to dry. I love you too, she whispered. I think I have almost from the beginning, though I scarcely dared admit it to myself. The joy that transformed Finn's face was like sunrise breaking over the mountains. He raised one hand to cup her cheek, his touch reverent. May I kiss you? In answer, Tabitha rose on tiptoe and pressed her lips to his. The kiss was gentle at first, a tentative exploration, then deepened into something more assured, more passionate. His arms encircled her waist, drawing her closer, and she wound her arms around his neck, giving herself over to the sweetness of the moment. When they finally parted, both a little breathless, Finn rested his forehead against hers. I have one more gift for you, he murmured. One I wasn't sure I'd have the courage to give tonight. He reached into his pocket and withdrew a small velvet box. Tabitha's breath caught as he opened it to reveal a simple gold band set with a single pearl. It was my grandmother's, Finn said. My father gave it to my mother when they were married, and she gave it to me before she died, saying I should give it to the woman who would bring joy back to my life. He took a deep breath. Tabitha Harlow, will you marry me? Through her tears, Tabitha smiled up at the man who had taken in a stranger and found a partner, who had given her not just shelter but a home, not just protection but love. "Yes," she said, her heart so full she thought it might burst. "Yes, with all my heart." As Finn slipped the ring onto her finger, then sealed their engagement with another kiss, Tabitha thought of the twisting path that had brought her to this moment. The false promises that had lured her west, the danger that had followed, the grief and loss that had shaped them both. All of it had led here, to this perfect Christmas Eve in a home filled once more with love and hope. No one had come to claim her that September day at the train station. Instead, she had claimed her own place in Junction Creek, in Finn's home, in a future brighter than any she could have imagined. And as the snow fell softly outside and the fire cast its golden glow over the man who would soon be her husband, Tabitha knew with absolute certainty that she was exactly where she was meant to be.